The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Union membership in California and the nation is declining, and a Supreme Court ruling seems to undercut the political influence of labor. What's the future of the labor movement? We asked the president of the San Mateo County Central Labor Council. The game is labor. The game is on. Welcome to the game. I'm Mark Simon. My partner, Kevin Mullin, is on assignment. Unions represent 78,000 workers in San Mateo County, almost 19% of the total number of employees working in the county. The San Mateo County Central Labor Council, through its political arm, endorsed 35 candidates in last year's local elections, and 29 of them won election. And union-led campaigns for a $15 minimum wage are gaining more and more support at city councils throughout the county. Even so, union membership is declining, and a 2018 Supreme Court ruling put at risk the ability of unions to collect dues for political campaigns. Joining us to talk about all this is Lamoin Werlein-Jaen, president of the San Mateo County Central Labor Council. Thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to dialogue.
Let's talk a little bit about declining membership. It must be a troubling thing for you to see your numbers going down. What do you think is at the heart of that, and what is it you can do about it?
Well, it's important when you're looking at union density, the percentage of workers that are in unions, to distinguish between the private sector and the public sector. In the private sector, there has been a dramatic decline in union density over the course of the last 40 years.
Let me interrupt you a second. What do you mean by union density?
Union density is the percentage of workers that are in unions. Okay. So 19% density percentage of workers.
So your raw number may have gone up or may have been stable, but how many of the people in the workplace you're representing is declining?
Correct.
Okay.
And in the private sector, that decline has been pretty dramatic over the course of the last 40, 50 years. The private sector union rate, density, reached its peak in the mid-1950s at around 35% of the workforce, private sector. Today,
that's when a huge part of our economy was manufacturing.
Correct, and the manufacturing unions were absolutely at the heart of the labor movement at that time. The union rate density in the private sector today has dipped below 7%. So as you can see, it's been a dramatic reduction and contraction in the labor movement in the private sector. At the same time, in the public sector, the union rate nationwide, close to around 30%, has held firm in the last 15, 20 years. And we haven't seen the dramatic decline in the public sector that we've seen in the private sector. Now, you alluded to the Janus decision last summer, which really does impact unions' ability to organize its membership. We shall see if that has an effect going forward. But thus far, after the Janus decision, there hasn't been a dramatic drop-off in union membership in the public sector.
Well, now, some recent data I read said that 50% of California government workers are union members, but that's down from 55% in the last few years. So there has been, that's a substantial decline. What do you think is going on? Why is it the shift? Let's talk about the private sector first. Is it because we're shifting to a service economy and moving away from manufacturing jobs, and it's simply harder to organize contractors, independent workers?
That's certainly part of the picture. In the private sector, I think that there's been a variety of trends that really have impacted the labor movement in a dramatic way. One is economic restructuring, offshoring of manufacturing, and the dramatic loss of manufacturing jobs, which were high union density jobs back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So certainly as manufacturing has been offshored, there's been a dramatic impact in there. There's also been a dramatic impact by automation, the breaking down of large factory production centers into multiple smaller production centers has disaggregated the workforce in many respects. That's also impacted unions. And then we've also had an adverse political and legal climate, quite frankly, for the last 30 years that has also impacted unions. So in the private sector, it's been a variety of factors, including economic restructuring, political and economic climate, and as well as automation has had a dramatic impact impact in the labor movement. And it's important to point that out because what has not been happening is that workers have not been going and filing petitions to get rid of their unions. So it's not the case that workers have been abandoning their unions. It's rather the case that the jobs have been restructured or have gone offshore. That's in the private sector.
Is that very purposeful? You think is it one of the goals of private industry is to diminish the impact and importance and influence of unions?
Well, certainly with respect to the political climate, beginning with the Reagan administration and subsequent, within the GOP, there has been a very strong anti-union strain, and there's been a variety of pushes over the years to curtail and to some degree offset the power of unions. So certainly there's been a political agenda driven by the Koch brothers and a variety of other conservative foundations which have deliberately attacked the labor movement. So certainly in the political climate, that has been the case. Let's
talk about the public sector, because it looks as though most of your eggs are in that basket.
Correct.
Without government workers, the union movement would really be in trouble. How has that become so important, and why do you think that's become so important?
Well, as you alluded, that's absolutely the case. The way I would characterize it is that the center of gravity within the labor movement has shifted from the private sector to the public sector. Right now, there are roughly an equal amount of workers organized in the public sector as well as the private sector, somewhere in the range of about 7 million workers in this country. But of course, in the private sector, that represents a much smaller percentage than in the public sector. So the center of gravity of the union movement really has shifted to the public sector. That is the place where the labor movement has the most strength, where the labor movement has continued to grow, and where the labor movement has been able to bring to bear leverage in the political arena, leverage in the workplace for improving members' standard of living.
But doesn't that present a real problem in that what you're relying on is a source of revenue for paying your workers that comes out of the public's pocket? And doesn't that invite some built-in resentment by the public toward union workers who are threatening strikes or who are demanding more pay? And so as a taxpayer, that's coming out of my pocket. Isn't that a more politically difficult landscape to navigate?
Yes, it certainly is. And when public sector unions find themselves in a situation where they're taking job action, it's obviously the case that it's public services that will be directly impacted right away. In that respect, I think that unions need to do a better job of reaching out to the public and developing an understanding that our interest in the labor movement in decent, good jobs in the public sector that create a workforce committed to providing good services, that those interests overlap with the public's interests. And I think that the recent teacher strikes really illuminates that. Insofar as teachers, I think, have been very smart in the recent period to reach out to the public and help the public understand that their demands ultimately are demands that will lead to better schools, better services, if you will. But there's definitely a tension there, and that tension has, to some degree, grown over the years to the degree to which benefits such as pensions have been greatly curtailed, reduced, and eliminated in the private sector, leaving the public sector virtually the only workforce out there with pensions and with retirement security. So that disparity is absolutely driving divisions. And it's incumbent upon the labor movement, I think, to really help the public understand that by defending, for instance, pensions in the public sector, that it creates a base level that perhaps will allow us to restore pensions in some of the private sector, or at least defend those few pensions systems that do exist in the private sector.
We're going to take a quick break. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. We're talking to President of the San Mateo County Central Labor Council, Lamoin Werlein-Jaen. Thank you for being here. We were talking about the public sector, and there are some people who simply don't think the public workers should be organized. And that the process of organizing them, negotiating contracts, has resulted in a skewing of what used to be said about public employment, which was you paid a little bit less, but you got better benefits and you got a pension, and you referenced pensions earlier. But now it seems as though you get better benefits, you still get some, you get a funded pension, which you don't get in the private sector, and that the pay scale is competitive with the private sector. And so therefore people think that basically public employment work has become too rich. What's your response to that?
Well, the one data point there that I would challenge is that in the public sector, salaries have risen to a level that you see in the private sector. That is not the case if you look around the Bay Area, for instance, which are the contracts that I'm more familiar with. In most classifications that you will see in the public sector, comparable private sector positions are in fact still paid substantially higher. You're right that public sector employment was always augmented, those salaries, with decent benefit packages and so forth. And most of those benefit packages still hold. But even there have been dramatic reductions over the year. Most of the public sector employees in the greater Bay Area, most, not all, participate in CalPERS. And it was in 2012 that a new tier of pension benefits, greatly reduced compared to previous benefits, was instituted statewide. So that today, a typical public sector employee participating in CalPERS is not going to retire in their 50s. They're going to retire in their 60s, as in the private sector, with a benefit that is nowhere near what it used to be. That said, we still do have public sector pensions, and as I mentioned earlier, in the private sector, over the course of the last 30, 40 years, those pensions have been eliminated, gradually reduced, and transferred into 401k and determined contribution plans that exist. So on one hand, public sector employees typically are not going to make the same that they're going to make in the private sector, but they are going to have a pension and generally a decent health plan as well. As I mentioned earlier, I do think that disparity creates tensions between public sector unions and the general public. But what is important for us to do as a labor movement is to really, again, to help the public understand that by maintaining decent jobs, decent employment, long-term employment through benefits like pensions, that's how you're going to have that stable, professional, dedicated workforce that is going to provide those services that we all want. I think you could look at a city like San Jose, for instance, and things have begun to change there, but going years back when ex-Mayor Reed had pushed for a dramatic reduction in public sector pensions in the city of San Jose, and on top of that, there was also a wave of concessions where employees took a 10% pay cut. 10 years later, that city is still feeling the effects of the curtailment in public services and the impact that had on public services.
Particularly in the police department, where there have been departures in droves over the last 10 years there. Let's shift gears a little bit. The Central Labor Council has been very active in pushing for a $15 an hour minimum wage, and has gotten a number of city councils to adopt that as the official sort of acceptable level of wage for that city. There are 2 or 3 more that I think are ready to be on the stage in their own regard. Those aren't unionized jobs that you're getting a minimum wage for.
Correct.
How does it help the union movement to push for that? And what about those who say that you're making it harder and harder for things like the cost of housing to go down, or the cost of construction to go down when you're pushing for an increased minimum wage that's substantially higher than it has been in the past.
Correct. Well, I think that the labor movement adding impetus to the drive to increase the minimum wage has been critical, especially in the greater Bay Area. Labor has played a central role throughout the Bay Area in pushing municipalities to increase that minimum wage up to $15 an hour. And we've been very successful there. For the American labor movement, I think addressing income inequality and looking for ways to bolster the income of the lowest income earners in our economy is important for all of us on multiple levels. And not only because on one hand, the rising tide lifts all boats, and as we bring wages up from the bottom, it tends to have a ripple effect, moving wages above them up as well. But again, it's a way to try to address the rising inequality and income disparities in this country and in the Bay Area.
Well, those are good reasons to do it, but how does it help? I mean, at the same time, your membership is declining. So you're pushing for some of the principles that really have been sort of part and parcel of the union movement, which is better wages. Mm-hmm. But it's not adding to your membership. It's not adding to your influence.
No, but the best of the labor movement in this country, in my opinion, has been precisely when it has tackled greater social and economic issues and questions and attempted to bring the resources, the organizational capacity, and the political leverage of the labor movement to bear on those bigger economic and social questions. For all of us in the labor movement, inequality is a vital issue. When you look up and down San Mateo County, all of our different commercial strips, be that here in San Carlos or Millbrae or San Mateo, all of those commercial strips and all of that vitality requires a populace that has the ability to spend, the ability to deploy its resources in our communities. And to the degree to which income inequality threatens those communities, it threatens all of us. And I think that the main point I want to make in that is that the American middle class is the product of public policy. The labor market has never...
Let me have you hold that thought. We'll come right back to it, I promise.
Very good.
And we'll be right back with you in just a second. Stick around.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back. I'm Mark Simon. We're talking today with the president of the San Mateo County Central Labor Council, Lamoin Werlein-Jaen. It's a complicated name for a white guy like me. We were talking about income inequality and the need for sustaining a middle class that can continue to allow the economy to thrive, if I'm correctly interpreting what you were saying.
Correct, absolutely. And I do think that income inequality is the greatest challenge that we're facing now collectively, not only obviously as a labor movement, but as a community in various cities. What I wanted to emphasize on that, though, is that the American middle class is fundamentally the product of public policy. Market forces in the labor market have not tended by themselves to create a large income group in the middle of the income ladder. It's been public policy that has created the American middle class through the Home Loan Administration, through the GI Bill, through the Pell Grants, through various means where the government and government policies were implemented, designed to bolster and strengthen the middle of the income ladder. And promoting unionization was certainly a big part of that. So when you take all of those things together, I think that the American labor movement firmly understands that we cannot either defend long-term what we have, nor advance progressive policies that will address things like income inequality without building political alliances, without building alliances in the community, and without having a perspective that our work and our tasks extends beyond our membership. First and foremost, unions need to deliver for their membership. But secondarily, unions need to understand that that is happening within a particular political and economic context, and that ignoring that does not permit you to do the kinds of things you need to. So in that respect, regardless of whether or not we've had blinders on in the past, at this moment in time, it is vital for the labor movement to help give impetus and push for a broader set of policies that impact the community and that help draw out the fact that the labor movement and the community do in fact have a lot of overlapping interests.
Well, as I'm sure you've noticed, it seems to me that in the past 10, maybe 15 years, the economy of the peninsula has changed dramatically. Mm-hmm. That the tech industry sort of overwhelms the entire area. Most of the development that's taking place on the commercial side is to fuel the tech industry, to provide R&D facilities, office buildings, whatever they need. And even the residential development has been fueled, and the rising costs have been fueled by the influx in income levels of tech workers. What sort of threat, if that's the right word for it, does this present to your membership, who aren't going to be certainly aren't likely to be tech workers?
Well, within the tech sector, I think it's important to point out that there is a very broad range of occupations and a broad range of income levels. And within the tech sector, I think you could argue that there's a certain disparity and inequality within those, between perhaps programmers and engineers on one side and other parts of the workforce on the other.
Like what?
Like
the security guards?
Security guards, cafeteria workers, transport workers, warehousing.
You would count them as tech workers?
Well, working in the tech sector.
Okay.
And unfortunately, those are the low end in terms of income of the tech sector. So one of the things that labor has been trying to do is figure out not only how to organize that part of the tech sector, but obviously to raise its income levels and to raise the standards of living there. That is one way.
You haven't, but you've struggled to figure that out, haven't you?
Absolutely. Now, there's been some very big steps forward in the last couple of years with respect to transport drivers and cafeteria workers being organized by Unite Here. And there have been some important gains made in the recent period in that sector. Mm-hmm. The other side of that sector, the tech sector, are the more high income positions, programmers and so forth. But even there, we're seeing a great deal of discontent beginning to bubble to the surface, given the long hours that people are working, given the demands on their workload and so forth. So while there's decent compensation, it has never been the case that the labor movement was focused exclusively on pay. It has always been the case that the American labor movement is concerned with working conditions, with a broader range of benefits, as well as pay. So there have been the beginnings, at least, of dialogue in the tech sector and unions across a variety of occupations, trying to figure out which sectors of the tech industry, number one, have a need for unionization, have a felt need for unionization, and want to have that dialogue with us. Mm-hmm. So I think that is, in many respects, the new frontier, obviously, in Silicon Valley and on the peninsula. But it's not the first time that we have confronted new emerging industries that are non-union, that perhaps in the life cycle of that industry, conditions might be better towards the beginning and gradually deteriorate over time. So it's a very dynamic and fluid situation, and whether or not tech and to what degree and what occupations will be unionized in the years ahead is going to be a function of the resources that the labor movement puts in, and on the other side, the working conditions that those individuals are facing.
Okay, we're running low on time. I want to ask you quickly, labor in San Mateo County still has substantial political influence, perhaps beyond what you would normally think of in terms of its numbers. what does labor bring to the political arena that allows it to have this level of resource or influence?
You are absolutely correct that in the Greater Bay Area and certainly on the peninsula, we in labor still command a substantial membership base, still command the resources necessary to be involved in the political arena, and bring organizational capacity to bear. What we bring in that respect is the mobilization of our membership. And there are very few organizations out there, if at all any, that can deploy real bodies on the ground to walk precincts, to knock on doors, to move voters in individual conversations, to staff the phone banks, to reach out to people that way, and to reach out to voters through our workplaces. There is, I would challenge no other organization in the Bay Area and certainly in the peninsula that has the ability to reach real individuals, mobilize them, and deploy that organizational capacity.
And we're going to have to stop. I think that's a good place to stop. Lamoin Werlein-Jaen.
Perfect.
President of the San Mateo County Central Labor Council, thank you for being with us. And thank you for being with us. Join us next time on The Game.